Welcome to the Love on the Go podcast, brought to you by Carolina's Matchmaker. I'm Laurie Burzak, and for over 17 years, I've been helping singles find the relationship of their dreams all over the Carolinas. Along the journey, I've met so many amazing people from all walks of life, and I'm excited to introduce them to you. What's my goal? I want to help you look at love and relationships in a new way, and to grow in your understanding of how love works. Let's learn together how people have overcome personal obstacles and have found love first and foremost with themselves. The ultimate goal is realizing that you are worthy and deserving of love. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. I am really excited about today's podcast. Mimi Winsberg is a Stanford-trained psychiatrist with over 25 years of clinical experience, and she's the co-founder and chief medical officer of the telehealth startup Brightside, which I want to talk to you about, and has been the on-site psychiatrist at the Facebook Wellness Center, which I'm very intrigued about hearing about that too. You've appeared regularly on Good Morning America, and you've been featured in like tons of national and international magazines and broadcasts and whatnot. And you have your BA in neuroscience from Harvard. Now, Speaking in Thumbs is your first book, and I read the entire thing, and I am actually going to send a copy of this to all of my clients. I want you to know that. Welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. That's music to my ears. Makes me happy to hear that the book is spreading, I don't know, joy, wisdom, humor, whatever, all of you.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. And it takes the reader from online dating to courtship to relationships in the realm of texting and communication. So I really want people to read this. In fact, I just got off a coaching call with one of my clients. I get my clients on Match.com, and I'll happy to share my program with you. But basically, I'm looking at her messaging, and I'm like, we got to liven this up. We got to be flirtier. We need to ask more questions. We need to dig a little bit. We need to figure out people's love languages, and we need to figure out their humor and whatnot. And that's what your book takes us through. And what I love about your book, aside from the 7-page bibliography, is I know I'm such an English major, is the way you keep the reader so invested with examples of the texting. I'm like, I felt like I was a voyeur. It's very intriguing the way you wrote it.
I'm glad to hear that, because I really hoped to create that effect when I wrote the book, that as a psychiatrist, I hear people's stories all day long, as I'm sure you do too, in your line of work.
Yes.
And it's something that I think we don't all appreciate, of what do other people's text messages look like? What do these secret conversations look like? And I wanted to make that more of a public domain, really, and say, here are some of the trends that are going on, that I'm hearing from people, that I'm seeing in my friends, that I'm experiencing myself,
Yes.
and wanting to share that.
Well, give us a little background of what enticed you to write the book. What was your impetus?
Yeah. So you touched on it. I've been working in digital mental health for some time now. And digital mental health is basically, we devise tools to help deliver mental health care through telemedicine. But we also look at, different technical tools that we might use. And one of the things we were looking at is, from somebody's text messages, can you identify things like, are they depressed, or are they suicidal? Is there signal in a person's text message? It turns out there is, actually, and there's important information that we can glean from these messages. At the same time, as you mentioned, I was working at Facebook, treating, the inventors of the algorithm, the digerati, if you will. These are the folks that really understand the online world. And still, in my sessions there, people would throw a smartphone screen at me and say, what does this guy mean by this text? And how should I respond to this? And this was a preoccupation, a common preoccupation. And so it got me thinking that really texting is a pretty new language. We really only started texting in 2007. And now it's become the predominant way in which we communicate, particularly in our love relationships, particularly in our romantic lives. And our brains may be still struggling to catch up with this new language. And so I wanted to really impart insight, both from the behavioral science research that exists in this space, but also from people's experiences and my own experiences, because at the same time, my marriage, as I say in the book, my marriage fell apart right around the time that I took the job at Facebook. And so I myself was on online dating, experiencing this firsthand and applying some of the knowledge that I had to my interactions. And so it was sort of a collision of my professional and personal lives. And it felt like sort of a fun idea, but also something that could really benefit people.
Well, I think it's really interesting, and I'll be on. I'm going to be like brutally honest with you that I don't even like texting. And I was just talking to a friend of mine who said the same thing. I mean, and I don't know. I'm a Gen Xer, and so let's see, I'm 54, and I just can't imagine that being the way to start off a love relationship. But in the book, you're talking about that is what creates chemistry, is texting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think what's important is that everybody's style is different, right? And that's part of what I get into in the book when I talk about establishing chemistry and compatibility over text. And I talk about the love languages of text, and so I think different people have different preferred ways to communicate. Some people aren't naturally texters. I guess I personally sort of love texting, so
Right.
that's part of what drew me to it. But like it or not, it's what we do. And if you're on a dating app, that's going to be your first interaction with a person. And think of it like a job interview. I mean, to get to the first date, you have to text. And so, like it or not, I think it behooves us to learn this language.
100%, because some people are so stilted in the way that they write and very formal. And, all the nuances need to come out when you're texting. Otherwise, you're not going to attract people in.
Yeah, that's right. It's partly about attracting people, and it's also about screening people. Do you really want to go out on a first date with somebody if there's not a good reason to? And some people will like to get on the phone before meeting someone in person, but I argue that there's actually really salient information in the text messages.
Oh, 100%. And I know I'm all over the place with, I have like 1,000. It was so hard for me to hone in on which questions to ask you, Mimi. But one of the things that really caught my attention was you talk about a slot machine analogy and the addictive nature of being online dating. And there's so many choices that it's kind of like overload and people just literally shut down. But that on the other hand, they can't stop the swiping. And it's like the paradox of choice, and it's the addiction. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think that the slot machine is really the apt analogy, because we get a bit of a dopamine rush when we swipe right and get a connection, a new match, and then I think for many people, getting a new message in their inbox can be a little bit of a dopamine rush. And there's this feeling, I think, that dating apps create in the raw numbers and volume of people that they expose you to, but wait, there's more. No matter what you've matched with, no matter who you're talking to, you still feel like you have 100 other people, in the palm of your hand that are available to chat with.
Yes.
And what I argue is that you're only going to get out what you put in. So if you start to just get into this mode of more is better, and I'm looking for that rush, you may skirt over something more meaningful, more valuable, that you'll be less likely to miss if you take your time and get into a deeper conversation, be that over text or otherwise, with a person that you have matched with. And I see this happening for a lot of people, where they're moving a bit too fast in order to be able to extract what's really important.
So can you give an example of what that looks like?
Sure. I think our brains are only sort of able, Helen Fisher talks about this in her lectures, but our brains are only able to sort of process so much information. And probably once you've got about 6 or 7 choices at your disposal, if you have more choice, your brain's going to kind of flood and go into and shut down, and I talk about this in the book. These studies have been done, whether it comes to picking a breakfast cereal, a flavor of jam at the grocery store, or picking a partner, that if you find yourself in the aisle with 100 different cereal boxes, it gets much harder to pick the right cereal than if you just have 6 or 7 choices and you can narrow it down to a few important things. And I think the same is true in our romantic lives, that, it's fun to have all this choice at your disposal with a dating app. But
Mm-hmm.
if you've decided that there are a few key things that are important to you, it
Mm-hmm.
might be better to hone in on, a couple of prospects and sort of give those a chance to see whether you can extract or, find what you need from those prospects, rather than going for as much volume as you can, making your head spin and then not know whether you're coming or going.
Yeah. And if you think about it, back in the old days, you lived in a town and there were 5 or 6 eligible people in your age range that you got to choose from as your life partner, and you chose somebody and you were done. And then all of a sudden, I mean, that's a exaggeration, and then the world
Actually,
opens up.
Probably not an exaggeration. And I don't
Okay.
know that we want to go back to village life per se.
Right.
But I think the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction now.
100%.
And what's wonderful about that is we meet people on dating apps that are well outside of our social sphere, people we would never
Mm-hmm.
meet in real
Mm-hmm.
life, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. And so we're seeing a lot more cross-cultural
Mm-hmm.
coupling. We're seeing coupling across classes. These are all wonderful things, to see
Mm-hmm.
this kind of availability. But sort of the kinds of people that you may meet online aside, I think it's important to note that you're not going to effectively be able to have 50 different conversations and date, 20 different people at once and keep it all straight.
Exactly. And I mean, I love the way it's opened people up to be able to date across state lines, internationally, or whatnot. It's also really wonderful for the LGBTQ community, because
Sure.
it's really hard to know who's who and also who's available. So I love it for that reason, especially. And now, to talk about like the overload kind of feeling, I'll tell you that the people, when they hire me for online dating assistance, a lot of times, attract, very attractive people, they get online and they get so many messages that they shut down. I once had a woman like in tears call me, and she was like, I know it's after hours, but you have to help me sort through all these people. I don't even know who to reach. I don't know who to respond to.
Yes.
And that's kind of the benefit of hiring a professional person to assist you with online dating. But that paradox of choice is such a good one. And I thank you for putting that in your book. And then we touched on earlier for a moment about the love languages, which a lot of people are familiar with, and let's talk about how you can determine someone's love language by the way that they're texting. I think that would be an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, yeah. So you're referencing Gary Chapman's work. And
Mm-hmm.
he wrote this perennially best-selling book about the 5 love languages and how we communicate. The notion behind it, of course, is that we all have a way that we like to give love, and we have a way that we like to receive love. They may not be the same way, but we have a way we like to give and a way we like to receive.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that people have similarly a way that they like to communicate over text message, and that I tried to break it down into 5 patterns. I don't think it's something you're going to learn instantly, like on a dating app about somebody. I think it's something that takes a little longer. That particular notion is something I explore in the second third of the book. So the book's broken down into the first part, which is swiping, how to kind of figure out who you're talking to online. The second part is syncing, how to establish your relationship over text. And then the third part is looking back at your text messages more to review shifts that may have happened in your relationship, or perhaps to analyze a relationship that's gone sour after the fact. But in this notion, in this second part where you're talking about connecting with somebody, I think learning their text love language is a key factor, because you don't want to be pestering somebody endlessly if they're not somebody that likes to receive a lot of text during the day. And so I break it down into compliments over text, which mirror Gary Chapman's words of affirmation. And then this idea of banter, I call it riffing, but that's the sort of funny back and forth that you can do with somebody over text when you don't really have anything to talk about specifically. And that's more the equivalent to quality time. And then there's the notion of spoon feeding, where you're giving somebody updates about yourself throughout the day.
Right.
Or there's the nudging, which is checking in with them about how their day is going throughout the day. And then, finally there's what I call nooking, which is, everything from sweet nothings to sexting, full on sexting. But people have different ways they like to communicate. And I think if you're, my personal love language is riffing. I would say I love to have the banter. But if you're chatting with somebody who doesn't like to text, that's not going to go over well. And
Right.
The updates throughout the day, those are, they can be reassuring, but if you have a busy job, they can also be annoying too. So, I think you want to know what your partner is up for when it comes to that. Too much, too little, just try to get it right for them.
And have those conversations when you first start dating, or maybe after 5 dates or so.
Or pay attention to what their style is and, how they respond. Are they slow to respond? Are they fast to respond? That'll give you some clues too.
Yeah. And don't take it personally if they're slow to respond and get defensive. That's what I love. You gave so many good examples of how to avoid getting defensive by texting, and how to also, you mentioned that before you send something, pause and maybe even have somebody else read it if you're concerned about, how it could be misconstrued in some way. And also having any kind of altercation. I'm like not a fan. I always say if you're going to have any kind of disagreement, pick up the phone. Yeah. But according to your book, I mean, you could also do it by texting. And I was like, whoo, that's a thing. Yeah.
Well, I think an overriding principle there might be to be curious. Don't assume you know what the other person's thinking. Ask questions, be curious, stay open-minded. And if you're trying to resolve conflict, take your time with it. Think about how you're crafting the note. Asynchronous communication, texting, because it's asynchronous, allows us to reflect and compose our thoughts before we send it off. And so if you're going to get into a disagreement over text, use that pause feature of texting that's available, where you can think through, is this really what I want to say? How is this going to come across when the other person reads it in their head?
Yeah. And you said that you can really tell a lot about someone in about 20 text messages. Would you say that's with the online dating, or in sort of the middle part of the relationship? And what should people be looking for? And
right.
Yeah,
no, I meant that kind of early on, like more sort of as you're trying to decide, is this person worth meeting, or is there any there for me?
And what are some ways that you can better get to know somebody quickly online to determine if they're worthy of meeting someone or not?
Well, you asked just a minute ago, you said, what should people be looking for? And that may be something I would question, because I don't think everybody's looking for the same thing, right? I think what you're looking for is different than what you should be looking for in the text. So the first thing is to sort of figure out, yes, what are you looking for? What kind of person, what kind of relationship are you looking for? And then what I would say in those first 20 texts is use those texts as an opportunity to really flesh out who is this person that I'm chatting with. And you're not going to do that by having stilted, boring conversation. How was your day? That's not going to give you a lot of how was your weekend, which is how so many people open online text messages. That's not going to necessarily get you where you want to go. That I think you have to ask deeper questions, not maybe first question, but you have to start having a more playful or a deeper conversation in those first 20 texts to reveal some truth about the person. And so I give people techniques in the book on how to do that.
I loved it so much. And especially like throwing in something that you wouldn't necessarily expect to hear, like some kind of strange question.
Throw some curveballs.
The curveball.
Get people a little bit off balance. Get them off script, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're doing an interview, if you were interviewing me here and just not giving me any challenging questions, we wouldn't really get at anything, And so you want to challenge people a little to sort of get at, what are they really thinking?
Yeah. Perfect. And then let's talk about red flags with texting. And if you can tell somebody's a narcissist or a liar or someone who's neurotic, and let's talk about that.
Yeah. And, again, my red flag might not necessarily be your red flag. I think we all have different tolerance, but I would say that, there are a few features that are to be avoided. Lying. I don't think any of us really want to be with a liar,
Exactly.
And so I give people tools to spot liars. I mean, these are techniques that are used by the FBI, but
Mhm.
they're if somebody, it's worth saying that somebody really wants to lie and they're really good at it, they, it is not that hard to fool even people who have taken expert lie detector courses.
Mhm.
Generally speaking, things tips I give people in the book are, if somebody's dropping the first person pronoun, that can be a sign of lying. They're trying to emotionally distance themselves from the statement. And so by dropping the I in the
Mhm.
statement, it it can make a lie feel less personal somehow. And so that's one thing to look for. I think statements like, to be honest with you, candidly, I'm not going to lie. People tend to
Mhm.
use those a little bit when they are lying. They also will provide either too much detail or the text will be devoid of detail. So looking for the sort of right detail content, I think, is important there. So lying, I think, is one thing to think about. Spotting, the other thing I talk about is this notion of intimacy. That's
Mhm.
like too much too much intimacy too fast, and over promising, too much revealing, getting into conversations that would be normally saved for the third, fourth, fifth date, already
Mhm.
happening straight away before you've met them. That can be an indication of a less secure attachment style. And so I would say that could be a bit of a red flag.
Someone calling you dear, that kind of thing. Oh, I hate it when I see that
Yeah,
early
that's
on.
a presumption of intimacy that
Exactly.
isn't there yet.
Mhm. Or heart emojis, that kind of thing. When it's like you've barely spoken back and forth, it's, I think, too much too soon. That
Too much.
gives me pause for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And I think that the difficult thing is, if you really, really want to have a romantic relationship in your life, for some people
Mhm.
that's appealing, right? Oh,
Mhm.
he's all in,
Mhm.
and so I think you have to balance that desire for intimacy with being a little bit concerned about, again, what I call instamacy.
Yes. And then you even said something about how narcissists use a lot of exclamation points and all capital letters and that type of thing, which I
Think back to our
100%
former
can relate
president,
to.
right?
Yes.
Good
Mhm.
example.
Yeah, that
um,
is a perfect example.
yeah, yeah. It's a sense of self-importance there, right? That
Mhm.
a pay attention to me quality, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Using humor to put you down, what's referred to as
Yes.
negging. I
Yes.
think that is not a good sign early on. That humor, I would say, a sense of humor is a great trait in a partner.
Mhm.
But that humor should be self-enhancing humor or affiliative humor. So humor that's used to laugh together or to make the best of a bad situation, not to like poke at you or put you down early on. That's not going to play out well. Same with
Mhm.
controlling behavior. If you see controlling behavior early on, that's probably only going to get worse.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I was on with one of my clients the other day and we were looking at somebody that liked her and he sent her a little message. And so we looked at his profile and then we said, let's get back to him. And we started looking at some other men. And then he sent her a message and he said, oh, you're just going to look at me? You're not going to respond? And then he said something else. What? Is there something wrong with your phone? And so I immediately blocked him. I said, this is anyone that sort of attacks you in this way is not somebody that you ever want to be in a relationship. He
100%.
just like showed himself and
Yeah.
thank you for showing up and block.
Right.
But, he was doing exactly what you were just talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This comes from probably a sense of, I mean, one of the things I say in the book is it probably comes from a sense of insecurity that these people are,
Mhm.
feeling out at sea in the process. And so what do? They're trying to control and batten down all the hatches. But, the problem is you're not a boat. So
Exactly.
don't put up with that kind of behavior early on.
Yeah, exactly. So here's a question. Say somebody goes out on 2 dates, 3 dates with someone, and it's just not working out. What do you think the best way is to break up with someone by text?
Yeah. And I think whether you do this over text or over the phone
Mhm.
really depends on what kind of interactions you've had with them up to that point, right? Have you been intimate? Have as
Mhm.
is there how much time has been spent. And
Mhm.
I think if it feels like there was really a lot in it for one person, then it's probably worth picking up the phone in that situation.
Mhm.
But I think in more cases, you haven't really fully committed to it at that point, right?
Mhm.
And there's just a sense that this wasn't ever really right.
Mhm.
And then I think the nice thing to do is to just respectfully say, I don't, um, I either, if you want to stay friends, say that. If you don't want to stay friends, just say wish you the best,
Mhm.
but I think just to respectfully send a note, letting the other person know that um, they shouldn't be paying attention to you. Now, if it's just naturally falling off and neither person is particularly texting, then there's no need to say anything at all. If there's just a mutual sense that, well, this probably isn't really going anywhere, there's no need to make somebody feel bad by sending a note like that. I think the only reason to send a note like that if there's a mismatch in understanding about where things are going.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just thinking about a date that I sent out years ago, and the woman called me up and she said, "Oh, we went out one time and he sent me a message and said, I just don't think we're a love match, this, that, and the other." And she was like, "Well, I
Unnecessary.
didn't think we were either,"
Yeah,
but I
unnecessary.
wasn't going to talk about it, but he
Right.
wanted to like clean it up and
Yeah,
tie a
because
big red
the
bow
truth
on it.
is, it doesn't feel good to get a
Mm-mm,
message like that, even if you
mm-mm,
weren't interested, right? No, I think
mm-hmm,
the only reason to send something, it's not a breakup. Like, in those instances, you're not breaking up. But I think if
exactly.
you've been, intimate and there is some
Mm-hmm,
expectation that things are moving forward,
mm-hmm.
then, if you must do it by text, do it kindly, right?
Yeah, perfect. One last question I had for you. Out of all the personality tests, you're a big fan of the big five personality tests. Can you describe this and how once you figure out who you are, how it can predict your romantic life?
Yeah. Well, the reason I like the big five is because it tends to be a stable measure of personality over time. So
Mm-hmm.
it's unlike some other personality tests that you might find online, they're less validated or might shift more over the course of the lifetime. The big five tends to be validated, at least in educated populations, and
Mm-hmm.
of course these things differ cross culturally and so forth. But I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
for the American population, it's a good test, and it tends to be stable over time. If people aren't familiar with it, the acronym I use to remember the big five personality traits is OCEAN. So
Mm-hmm.
O stands for openness to experience. How open are you? How sort of fluid are you thinking about fluidly are you thinking about constructs? And then the second is conscientiousness. Is that a big part of your personality, is following through on what you say you're going to do? And then
Mm-hmm.
E is for extroversion versus introversion. So do you get your energy from spending time with people, or do you recharge from being alone? And then A is agreeableness. Are you a go with the flow kind of person, or do you tend to sort of have your own opinion and set your own boundaries? And then the last one, N, is for neuroticism. And, I think most of us know what neuroticism means, but it's, if you're neurotic, you tend to get more anxious or a little bit high strung about um, emotionally ridden situations, and a less neurotic person will be more easygoing in that situation, or less sensitive, let's say, to their environment. Of course, all these personality traits have pros and cons either way, and there's no one good personality or one bad personality or one to
Right.
avoid. I do present in the book some research on, who of these personalities make for better long-term partners, if you're
Mm-hmm.
looking for a long-term monogamous relationship. And not surprisingly, the agreeable and conscientious folks tend to do better in longer term monogamous relationships, whereas those who are extroverted and very open to experience, all good traits, but they may need a little bit more excitement in their lives. And so um, I think, you want to think about who you are, what you're looking for. And then I do give people ways to sort of see in your text messages who you might be chatting with. So, signs of extroversion, signs of openness. This comes down to word choice, grammar use, emoji use. It's amazing what some of the details about
Mm-hmm.
our communication styles reveal about us. But not surprisingly, language is a window into our brains, right? And so
Mhm.
through these text bubbles, I think we can peer into people's psyches.
Absolutely. And the book is brilliant. Everybody, please go buy this book. I can't say enough good things about it. It's really a game changer in for me and the way I look at things now. I feel like my brain just kind of exploded when I read it. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy life and everything that you're doing right now to help people to be able to take people to this next level.
Oh, thank you so
Um,
much. Yeah,
yeah.
the book is called Speaking in Thumbs: A Psychiatrist
Mhm.
Decodes Your Relationship Text, and so you can find it, anywhere books are sold, online in bookstores. And I welcome people's feedback about it. I love learning new things myself. Part of the reason I wrote the book was to learn, and so I would definitely welcome people's feedback about what they agree with or what they disagree with in the book.
Good. I'll put that in the show notes. And then we can find you at Twitter at Winsberg, Instagram at text.whisperer. And
That's
her
right.
website is Dr. Winsberg, Winsberg, BERG.com. Do you have a favorite charity? I like to always include that in the show notes as well.
Oh, good question. I definitely, anything that supports mental health is a favorite of mine. Most of the work that I do, that I wrote this book as a side project, but most of the work that I do is involved in making mental health care accessible and affordable and in a quality way. So at Brightside, we're treating depression in all 50 states now, depression, anxiety, other more severe mental illness. And we're trying to make appointments available fast and easily for people. So you can get an appointment within 48 hours if you sign up on the Brightside website. And so I'm a big supporter of any charity that is, helping to further the cause of dealing with mental health issues.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mimi. It was really, really a pleasure to have you.
So nice to be here.
Thanks for listening to Love on the Go. You can follow the podcast on any podcast app to be notified when our next episode comes out. Also, if you've loved this episode, I'd appreciate it if you could leave us a review or even share it with a friend that might benefit from what we talked about today. To learn more about me and how our team helps singles across the Carolinas and beyond find love, visit carolinasmatchmaker.com. You can find a link to our site in the show notes. Until next time.